Ephesus, 41 BC, inside the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a place of sanctuary, a place where no blood should be spilled, where the goddess herself protects those who seek refuge. A young woman kneels at the altar. Her hands grip the stone. She's praying, begging the goddess for protection. She's been here for years, safe, hidden, forgotten, or so she thought. The temple doors burst open. Roman soldiers. Their boots echo on marble floors. The priestesses scream, "This is sacred ground. You cannot do this." The soldiers don't stop. They have their orders from Mark Antony, from the most powerful man in the Eastern Empire. And behind those orders, another voice, a woman's voice, a queen's voice. The young woman at the altar looks up. She knows. She's always known this moment would come, because her sister never forgives. Her sister never forgets. And her sister is Cleopatra. The soldiers drag her from the altar. Her fingers scrape against stone as they pull her away. The priestesses cry out that this is sacrilege, that the goddess will punish this violation. The soldiers don't care. They have a queen to satisfy. They take her outside, into the garden behind the temple, where no one can see, where no one can interfere, and they kill her, quickly, efficiently, the way you kill someone who's been sentenced by an empress. Her name was Arsinoe. She was 26 years old. She was Cleopatra's younger sister, and she died because she made one fatal mistake. She challenged Cleopatra for the throne of Egypt. This is the story of what Cleopatra did to her sister. This is the story of how Julius Caesar watched it happen and did nothing. This is the story of how Mark Antony finished what Caesar started. And this is the story that history tried to bury. Because when you hear the name Cleopatra, you think of beauty, seduction, tragedy, romance. You think of Elizabeth Taylor in golden robes. You think of the queen who loved Caesar and Antony and died for love. You don't think of the woman who murdered her own family, who eliminated every rival, who turned her palace into a killing ground, who used Rome's most powerful men as weapons to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Today, you're going to learn the truth about Arsinoe, about what Cleopatra did to her, about how Caesar enabled it, about how Antony finished it, and about why this story matters more than all the Hollywood romance combined. Subscribe right now and turn on all notifications, because what you're about to hear will destroy every myth you've ever been told about Cleopatra. And YouTube doesn't want you to know this. The algorithm buries content that exposes the darkness behind legendary women. But you deserve the truth. Hit that subscribe button, click the bell, and let's uncover what really happened in that temple in Ephesus. Before we talk about how she died, you need to understand who Arsinoe was, because history barely remembers her.
She's a footnote in Cleopatra's story, a minor character, a rival who lost. But she was so much more than that. Arsinoe was born around 68 or 67 BC. She was Cleopatra's younger sister by about 2 years. They grew up together in the Ptolemaic palace in Alexandria. The same palace, the same tutors, the same education. They learned Greek, Egyptian, mathematics, philosophy, warfare, poison, everything a Ptolemaic princess needed to survive. Because the Ptolemaic dynasty didn't do family the way normal people do family. Brothers married sisters to keep the bloodline pure. Siblings competed for the throne. And the ones who lost didn't just lose power, they lost their lives. That was the rule. That was how it had always worked. Arsinoe knew this. Cleopatra knew this. They both knew that only one of them would survive. When their father died in 51 BC, the throne went to the 2 oldest children, Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. He was 10 years old. She was 18. They were supposed to rule together, co-monarchs, equal partners. That lasted about 5 minutes. Cleopatra wanted sole power. Ptolemy's advisors wanted to control the boy king. The palace split into factions. Civil war erupted, and Cleopatra was driven out of Egypt. She fled to Syria, raised an army, prepared to invade her own kingdom. That's when Julius Caesar arrived. Caesar came to Egypt chasing his rival, Pompey, but Pompey was already dead, murdered by Ptolemy's advisors, who thought killing Pompey would win Caesar's favor. They were wrong. Caesar was furious. He occupied the royal palace. He declared himself arbiter of Egypt's civil war, and Cleopatra saw her chance. You know the famous story. Cleopatra smuggled herself into the palace rolled up in a carpet. She had herself delivered to Caesar's chambers. She unrolled at his feet, beautiful, bold, irresistible. Caesar was captivated. He sided with Cleopatra. He declared her the rightful queen. And just like that, Ptolemy's faction had a problem. That's when Arsinoe made her move. The palace was in chaos. Caesar's small force was trapped in the royal quarter. The Egyptian army surrounded them. The city was in flames. Parts of the great library were burning, and Arsinoe saw an opportunity. She escaped from the palace, joined the Egyptian forces fighting Caesar, and declared herself queen. At 15 or 16 years old, Arsinoe became the rallying point for everyone who opposed Cleopatra, everyone who resented Rome's interference, everyone who wanted an Egyptian ruler who wasn't sleeping with a Roman general. Ancient sources describe Arsinoe as brave, intelligent, a natural leader. She didn't just claim to be queen, she acted like one. She commanded troops, she made strategic decisions. She turned what should have been an easy victory for Caesar into a months-long nightmare. The Alexandrian War nearly killed Caesar, nearly destroyed his reputation, and it was all because a teenage girl refused to back down.
But Caesar won. He always won. The Egyptian forces were defeated. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile trying to escape, and Arsinoe was captured. She was brought before Caesar in chains, a prisoner, a defeated rebel, a girl who had dared to challenge Rome. Caesar should have executed her. That's what Rome did to rebels. That's what anyone would have done. But Caesar didn't. He spared her. Why? Maybe he admired her courage. Maybe he wanted to show mercy to win Egyptian hearts. Maybe he knew that executing a teenage girl would make her a martyr. Or maybe Cleopatra asked him to spare her, because Cleopatra had other plans. If you're still watching, you now understand who Arsinoe really was. Not just Cleopatra's sister, but a warrior, a queen, a teenage girl who nearly destroyed Julius Caesar. Hit the like button right now if you think Arsinoe deserved better than history gave her. Because what happens next is where Cleopatra's true nature reveals itself, and it's where Caesar shows exactly what kind of man he really was. Caesar didn't kill Arsinoe, but he did something worse. He took her back to Rome, as a prisoner, as a trophy, as part of his triumph. A Roman triumph was theater, spectacle, propaganda. The victorious general would parade through the streets of Rome with his army, his loot, and his captives. The crowds would cheer, the Senate would applaud, and the prisoners would be displayed in chains as proof of Rome's superiority. Most of those prisoners were executed at the end of the parade, strangled in the prison beneath the Capitol while the celebrations continued above. Caesar's triumph in 46 BC was the biggest Rome had ever seen. 4 separate triumphs over 4 days, celebrating his victories in Gaul, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain. The wealth he displayed was staggering. Gold, silver, exotic animals, and prisoners. So many prisoners. Arsinoe was one of them, a princess, a queen, a girl who had commanded armies, now dressed in chains, paraded through the streets of Rome, while thousands of Romans jeered and pointed and laughed, while Caesar rode in his golden chariot behind her, while Cleopatra watched from somewhere in the crowd, savoring her sister's humiliation.
Ancient sources tell us something remarkable happened. The Roman crowd saw Arsinoe, saw how young she was, saw her dignity even in chains, and they felt pity. They started calling for Caesar to spare her, to show mercy, to release this brave young woman who had only been defending her country. Caesar heard them, and he relented. At the end of the triumph, instead of having Arsinoe strangled, he set her free. Sort of. He sent her into exile, to Ephesus, to the Temple of Artemis, where she would live under the protection of the goddess, where she would be safe, where she would never threaten Egypt again. It seemed like mercy. It seemed like Caesar was the compassionate victor, sparing the brave young queen, letting her live out her days in peaceful exile.
But it was a trap, because Arsinoe wasn't free. She was a prisoner in everything but name. She couldn't leave Ephesus, couldn't return to Egypt, couldn't marry, couldn't have children, couldn't claim the throne. She was alive, but she was neutralized, harmless, forgotten. Except she wasn't forgotten, because Cleopatra never forgot, and Cleopatra was patient. She had her throne, she had Caesar's support, she had a son, Caesarion, who she claimed was Caesar's child. She had everything she wanted, except one thing. Her sister was still alive, still a potential rival, still someone who could become a rallying point for anyone who opposed her rule. For 4 years, Arsinoe lived in that temple, safe under the goddess's protection. Caesar returned to Rome, fought more wars, became dictator, and then in 44 BC, he was assassinated, stabbed 23 times on the floor of the Senate, and with Caesar dead, everything changed. Rome plunged into civil war, the assassins versus Caesar's followers, Brutus and Cassius versus Mark Antony and Octavian. Egypt became a prize again, a source of wealth and grain that could tip the balance. And Cleopatra had to choose sides. She chose Antony, of course she did. Antony was Caesar's heir in the East. He was ambitious, powerful, malleable, and he was looking for an ally who could give him the resources to defeat Octavian. Cleopatra seduced Antony the same way she had seduced Caesar, not with beauty alone, but with intelligence, with wealth, with the promise of Egypt's support in his war against Rome. They became lovers, partners, co-rulers of the Eastern Mediterranean, and Cleopatra finally had the power to finish what she had started years before. She told Antony about Arsinoe, her sister, still alive, still in exile, still a threat. Because even in exile, even as a temple priestess, Arsinoe represented an alternative. If someone wanted to oppose Cleopatra, they could point to Arsinoe, the rightful queen, the one who had fought Rome, the one who had never betrayed Egypt. Cleopatra made her case. Arsinoe is dangerous. She's a rallying point for rebels. She needs to be eliminated. And Antony, drunk on wine and love and ambition, agreed. He gave the order. Send soldiers to Ephesus, bring Arsinoe from the temple, and kill her. Comment below with one word: murder or strategy. Was what Cleopatra did to Arsinoe cold-blooded murder or political necessity? And share this video right now. Send it to someone who thinks they know Cleopatra's story, because they don't, not until they hear this. Here's where the title of this video becomes clear: The Murder Caesar Ignored. But Caesar was dead by the time Arsinoe was killed, so how did he ignore it? The answer is in what happened before, in the choices Caesar made when he was alive, in the moments when he could have stopped Cleopatra and chose not to. Because Arsinoe wasn't Cleopatra's only victim. She wasn't even the first. Go back to 48 BC, the Alexandrian War. Cleopatra's brother-husband, Ptolemy XIII, drowned in the Nile. Official story, he was fleeing Caesar's troops. His armor was too heavy, he fell into the river and couldn't swim. Tragic accident. Except, ancient sources mention something strange. Ptolemy's body was recovered with his hands bound. His lungs were full of water and wine. He had been drugged, tied up, and deliberately drowned. Who gave the order? The sources don't say explicitly, but Cleopatra was the one who benefited. With Ptolemy dead, she was the sole ruler of Egypt. No more co-monarch, no more rival faction, just her. And Caesar didn't investigate, didn't question, didn't hold anyone accountable. He simply accepted Ptolemy's death as a convenient resolution to Egypt's civil war. Then there was Ptolemy XIV, Cleopatra's younger brother. After Ptolemy XIII died, Egyptian law required Cleopatra to marry her next brother. He was 12 years old, she was 22. They ruled together for 4 years, and then, in 44 BC, 3 days after Caesar was assassinated, Ptolemy XIV died suddenly. Cause of death? Unknown illness. The timing was too perfect. Caesar was dead, Cleopatra no longer needed Roman approval for sole rule, and her brother-husband conveniently died of poison. Symptoms: paralysis, convulsions, organ failure, classic hemlock. Again, no investigation, no trial, no consequences. Cleopatra declared her son Caesarion co-ruler, a 3-year-old boy she could control completely, and Rome said nothing. This is the pattern. This is what Caesar ignored. Not just one murder, but a systematic elimination of rivals. Ptolemy XIII, Ptolemy XIV, political enemies, wealthy Romans who opposed her, anyone who stood between Cleopatra and absolute power. And Caesar watched it happen, enabled it, protected her. Why? Because Caesar needed Cleopatra. Egypt was the wealthiest kingdom in the Mediterranean. Its grain fed Rome. Its gold funded armies. Its strategic position controlled trade routes. If Egypt stayed stable and loyal to Rome, Caesar could use its resources to dominate his rivals. If Egypt fell into chaos, Rome would starve. So Caesar made a calculation. He chose stability over justice. He chose a competent, ruthless ally over moral principle. He let Cleopatra murder her way to sole power because it served his interests. That's what great men do. They make ugly compromises and call it pragmatism. And Antony followed the same playbook. When Cleopatra asked him to kill Arsinoe, he didn't hesitate. He didn't question whether she deserved to die. He didn't care that she was living in sanctuary. He didn't consider that violating a temple would outrage the Greek world. He just gave the order, because keeping Cleopatra happy was more important than keeping his hands clean. The soldiers arrived at the Temple of Artemis in 41 BC. They found Arsinoe at the altar. She knew why they were there. She didn't beg. She didn't plead.
Ancient sources say she faced her death with dignity. The same dignity she showed when she commanded armies at 16. The same courage she showed when she was paraded through Rome in chains. They dragged her outside, and they killed her, in the garden, where the goddess couldn't see, where the sanctity of the temple couldn't protect her. And when it was done, Antony sent word to Cleopatra. It's finished. Your sister is dead. You have no more rivals. Cleopatra celebrated. She held feasts. She gave gifts to Antony. She thanked him for his loyalty. And she never spoke Arsinoe's name again. She ordered every reference to her sister removed from public records, every statue destroyed, every inscription chiseled away. She tried to erase Arsinoe from history completely. And she almost succeeded. For 2,000 years, Arsinoe was barely remembered, a footnote, a minor character, a failed rebel, until 1929, when archaeologists excavating in Ephesus found a tomb. Inside, the skeleton of a young woman, early 20s, royal burial, high status. Could it be Arsinoe? The debate raged for decades. Some scholars said yes. Others said the evidence was inconclusive. Modern forensic analysis in 2009 examined the skull, confirmed the woman was young, royal, possibly Ptolemaic, possibly Arsinoe. We may never know for certain, but the fact that we're still looking, still trying to recover her story, still refusing to let her be forgotten, that's a kind of justice. 4 minutes left, and what you've learned in the last 18 minutes has completely changed how you see Cleopatra. Hit the like button if you think Arsinoe's story deserves to be remembered, and comment below. Should Cleopatra be remembered as a great queen or as a murderer? Now let's talk about why this story still matters today. So Cleopatra murdered her sister. Caesar and Antony enabled it. History forgot about it. Why should you care? Why does a murder that happened over 2,000 years ago matter today? Because this story isn't about ancient Egypt. It's about how power works. It's about how successful people eliminate rivals. It's about how great men look the other way when their allies commit atrocities. It's about how history is written by winners and how victims get erased. Think about the narrative you've been taught. Cleopatra the beautiful, Cleopatra the seductress, Cleopatra the tragic heroine who died for love. That's the story Hollywood tells. That's the story that sells movies and books and documentaries. Beautiful woman uses her charm to seduce powerful men. Romantic, tragic, safe. But the real Cleopatra was something else entirely. She was brilliant, ruthless, strategic. She spoke 9 languages. She understood economics, warfare, diplomacy, poison. She ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms on earth, and she eliminated every single person who threatened her power. Her brothers, her sister, political rivals, wealthy enemies. She killed them all. And she used Rome's most powerful men as weapons to do it. That's not romance. That's Machiavelli 500 years before Machiavelli wrote The Prince. That's a masterclass in political survival. That's what it actually takes to hold power in a world designed to destroy you. And history buried it, because the story of a beautiful seductress is easier to digest than the story of a calculating political genius who happened to be a woman. Arsinoe's murder is the perfect symbol of this erasure. She was brave, intelligent, capable. She commanded armies as a teenager. She challenged Rome. She nearly won. And for that, she was paraded through Rome in chains, exiled to a temple, and murdered in a garden. Then her name was chiseled off every monument. Her story was reduced to a footnote. Her tomb was lost for 2,000 years. And Cleopatra? Cleopatra became a legend, the most famous woman in ancient history. Because she won, because she survived, because she controlled the narrative. Even in death, she controlled how people would remember her. She staged her suicide like theater, dressed in royal robes, surrounded by symbols of Egyptian power, bitten by a cobra, the sacred serpent of the pharaohs. She turned her death into mythology, and mythology is stronger than truth. Caesar and Antony are part of this story too. Both of them were celebrated as great men, conquerors, heroes, leaders of Rome. But both of them enabled Cleopatra's murders. Caesar watched her eliminate her brothers and did nothing. Antony ordered Arsinoe's execution himself. They violated sacred temples. They ignored their own laws. They sacrificed justice for political advantage. And history forgave them, because that's what history does for powerful men. It explains their compromises. It justifies their pragmatism. It frames their atrocities as necessary evils. Caesar needed Egypt stable, so he tolerated murder. Antony needed Cleopatra's support, so he killed her sister. Understandable, forgivable, the cost of doing business. But imagine if Arsinoe had won. Imagine if she had defeated Cleopatra in 48 BC. Imagine if she had become queen of Egypt. Imagine if Caesar had sided with her instead. Would history remember Cleopatra as a murderous rebel who tried to seize power through seduction? Would Arsinoe be celebrated as the righteous queen who defended Egypt from Roman interference? We'll never know, because Arsinoe lost. And losers don't get to write history. They get erased, forgotten, reduced to footnotes in their enemies' stories. That's why this matters. Because the same thing is happening right now. Right now, people in power are eliminating rivals. Right now, successful people are making ugly compromises and calling it necessary. Right now, atrocities are being reframed as strategic decisions. And right now, the powerful are writing the history that future generations will believe. The only way to fight it is to tell the stories that power once buried, to remember the victims, to name the crimes, to refuse to accept the sanitized version of history that makes powerful people look noble and their victims look insignificant. Arsinoe was not insignificant. She was a warrior, a queen, a teenager who nearly changed the course of history. She deserves to be remembered, not as Cleopatra's failed rival, but as her own person, brave, intelligent, murdered, and almost erased. But not quite, because we're talking about her right now, because archaeologists are still searching for her tomb, because historians are still reconstructing her story, because people like you are watching this video and learning her name. That's how memory survives. That's how justice, even delayed by 2,000 years, finally arrives. Cleopatra thought she could erase her sister. Caesar thought he could ignore murder for political gain. Antony thought he could violate a temple without consequences. And for 2 millennia, they got away with it. But history is longer than any of them imagined, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way back to the surface. This is the real story of Cleopatra and her sister. This is what Cleopatra really did. And this is the murder Caesar ignored. Arsinoe was 15 years old when she commanded armies, 16 when she was paraded through Rome in chains, 26 when she was murdered in a temple garden. She lived her entire adult life in exile, and she died because her sister wanted absolute power, and Rome's most powerful men were willing to help her get it. If you made it this far, you've just learned something that isn't in any history textbook. You've learned that the story of Cleopatra the seductress is propaganda, that the real Cleopatra was a calculating political genius who eliminated every rival, that Julius Caesar and Mark Antony enabled her murders because it served their interests, and that Arsinoe, the brave young queen who challenged Rome, was erased from history for 2,000 years. Here's what you need to do right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications. Click that bell icon, because YouTube actively suppresses content that challenges mainstream historical narratives. They want you watching feel-good documentaries that repeat comfortable myths. But you deserve the truth. Second, smash the like button. Every like tells the algorithm that people want real history. It helps this video reach more people who need to hear Arsinoe's story. Third, share this video everywhere. Post it on social media, send it to friends, email it to your history teacher. Because the only way we preserve the memory of people like Arsinoe is by refusing to let them be forgotten. Fourth, comment below. Tell me what you think. Was Cleopatra a murderer or a pragmatic ruler doing what she had to do? Was Caesar right to ignore her crimes? Should Arsinoe be remembered as a hero? I read every comment. Your engagement keeps this channel alive and keeps these stories from being buried again. Next video, we're going even deeper, into the life of Agrippina the Younger, the woman who murdered her husband, Emperor Claudius, the woman who installed her own son, Nero, as emperor, the woman who made Cleopatra look merciful. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Remember Arsinoe. Remember that history is written by winners, but truth is bigger than any empire. Remember that powerful people will always try to erase their crimes. And remember that as long as we keep telling these stories, the dead are never truly gone. I'll see you in the next one.